Let's everyone picture this. You are in a room built for 10 people, but 70 people are crammed inside it. You can't lie down, you can barely breathe, and there's just one toilet. The fan is broken, someone next to you has tuberculosis, someone else has been crying for 3 straight days. The walls are crumbling, the smell is unbearable, and the worst part is, you haven't been convicted of anything. You are just too poor to pay bail. This is not a scene from a dystopian novel. This is not a colonial era India. This is happening right now, tonight, inside jails across this country, to over 5 lakh human beings, the majority of whom have not been found guilty of a single crime. Now I know what you are thinking. This doesn't affect me. I'm not a criminal. I'll never go to jail. But here's the thing. That assumption is exactly what makes this crisis so dangerous. Because the people inside these prisons are not just criminals. A staggering 73% of India's entire prison population, nearly 3 out of every 4 people behind bars, has never been convicted of anything. They're called under-trial prisoners. People waiting for their trial to happen. People who under the law are presumed innocent, but who are in practice being punished every single day. And here's where it touches you directly. These are people from your country's most productive working age group. The latest NCRB data shows that 86.3% of India's prison population is between the ages of 18 and 50. These are breadwinners, parents, young men from small towns who couldn't afford a lawyer, people whose families are out there right now in your city, in your district, falling apart because someone is rotting in jail for a crime they haven't even been tried for yet. And you, as a taxpayer, are paying to keep them there. You are paying to run a prison system that is operating at over 112% of its own capacity. You are paying for a broken machine that isn't delivering justice. You are paying for a system that punishes poverty. So this isn't just a UPSC topic, this is a national emergency dressed up in a bureaucratic silence. So let's go in and let's dive deep into what is actually happening. Now, to understand what's happening today, you have to go back to the year 1894. Now, the year is 1894. Queen Victoria sits on the British throne. India is a colony of the British, and the British administrators, concerned about controlling a restless population, drafts the Prisoners Act of 1894. Now, the philosophy behind it is very simple and brutally honest. Prisons exists to punish, to isolate, to break the will of those who challenge order. Now, fast forward 130 years, that exact same law, the Prisons Act of 1894, governed India's prisons until just recently in 2023 when it was finally replaced. For over a century after independence, the philosophy of our prison system was still rooted in the colonial punishment logic. The state's job was to lock you up, not to reform you, rehabilitate you, or prepare you to return to the society, but to lock you up. Now, this matters because laws shape institutions, and institutions shaped by punishment logic don't just lock up guilty people, they lock up everyone who can't fight back. And here's the story of how India ended up there. After independence, the prison system was placed in the state list under the Constitution of India, meaning individual states are responsible for managing their own prisons. The central government, they can recommend, advise, and create model frameworks, but it cannot force states to act. And this federal fragmentation meant that for decades, prison reform moved at wildly different speeds across the country. Some states, they built new jails, and most they didn't. Some states recruited more staff, most didn't, and the courts kept sending people to jail, more and more people, year after year, into a system that was never expanded fast enough to hold them. And what is the result? A slow motion disaster that has been hiding in plain sight in our country. So if you look at it prospectively, between 2015 and 2024, India did manage to expand its total prison capacity by around 24%. Now, prisons were built and new prisons were built. Over 120 new facilities, they came up in our country. Around 2,268 existing prisons, they were renovated or they were expanded. And on paper, that sounds like progress. But here's the catch. The number of people being sent to jail grew faster than the number of beds being created. So even after all that construction and renovation, by end of 2024, India's 1,333 jails with the sanction detention capacity of 4.53 lakh people were holding over 5.11 lakh inmates. Now that's not a prison system, that's a pressure cooker, and the national occupancy rate was around 112.7%. Now that's actually a decade low, and the government is quietly proud of it. But a decade low of 112.7% is still every single jail in the country being over capacity. Imagine if every hospital in India was running at 112% occupancy. We would call that a healthcare collapse. But when it's prisons, we actually seem to look away, we actually seem to ignore it. Because we often feel that this is not going to affect us directly, this is not going to impact us directly. Now here's the part that most people, even most educated, engaged Indians, they don't fully grasp. See, India's prison problem is not primarily a capacity problem. It is a capacity problem, of course, but it is a justice delivery problem. And the difference is very, very critical for us to understand. See, think about it this way. If the issue was just overcrowding, too many beds, not enough space, the solution would be very simple, right? Build more jails, problem solved. But that's not what the data tells us. The data is telling us that 73% of people who are inside the jails today are under trials. They are unconvicted, not found guilty, still waiting for their day in the court. And now comes the first number that should genuinely disturb you. Around 9,028 people. That is the number of under trial prisoners in India who have been in jail for more than 5 years without a conviction. Just imagine 5 years. Now they are not found guilty of anything, and the courts haven't decided their cases. The trials are pending, and these people are sitting in the cell year after year watching their lives dissolve. To put that in context, in many of these cases, even if they were eventually convicted, the maximum sentence they would have received for their alleged crime would be less than the time they would have already spent waiting for trial. The punishment has already happened. There was just no verdict attached to it. The second number I want you to sit with and understand is that 87% in Delhi, the capital of our country, the city that hosts our parliament, our Supreme Court, our national conscience, 87% of the people in jail are under trials in Delhi. Just imagine. Delhi also has the highest prison occupancy rate in the entire country, which is around 194.6%. That means Delhi prisons are holding nearly double the number of people they were built for, and most of these people haven't been convicted of anything at all. Bihar mirrors this almost exactly. Also above 87% under trials in Bihar. And think about what that actually means structurally. These are not jails. These are pre-trial detention centers, if you look at it specifically, operating at a catastrophic scale. The word prison implies punishment after guilt is determined. What we have is mass incarceration of the presumed innocent. Now here's the third surprise, and the one which is about who these people are. See, the Law Commission of India in its 268th report in 2017 identified that the single biggest barrier to getting bail in India, it wasn't the severity of crime, it wasn't flight risk, it was poverty. The system requires you to produce a financial security, a cash guarantee to be released on bail. If you are poor, you cannot produce it, and so you stay in jail. Not because a judge decided you are dangerous, not because you are a flight risk, simply because you don't have money. This is constitutionally grotesque. Article 39A of our Indian Constitution guarantees equal justice and free legal aid to every citizen. But the bail system, as it currently operates, is a toll booth. And if you can't pay the toll, you don't get justice. You get a cell. The 46.4% vacancy rate in sanctioned medical staff across Indian prisons makes all of this even worse. Nearly half of the doctor positions in our jails are empty. So you have overcrowded prison cells, poor sanitation, and no doctors. The situation becomes even worse, and the predictable result is the spread of communicable diseases like tuberculosis and HIV, and a rising trend in deaths inside prisons, including suicides. And then there's something called the school of crime problem. See, when you pack unconvicted young men, first-time offenders, petty case under trials, someone arrested for a minor offense into a cell alongside hardened repeat offenders, what do you think will happen? You create a networking event for criminal activity. Young men who might have been rehabilitated come out knowing more dangerous people, more dangerous skills, and with fewer legal options for employment because of their detention record. Now the prison becomes a factory for the very criminality it was supposed to deter. When you talk about Chhattisgarh, notably managed to reduce its occupancy rate from extremely 234% in 2015 to 127.6% in 2024. So this is possible to improve. Chhattisgarh is a viable example for it. But Jammu and Kashmir moved away in the opposite direction. From a manageable 78% occupancy in 2015 to 148% in 2024, the crisis crisis is not uniform. It is not inevitable. It is a series of policy choices or the absence of them which is leading up to this particular crisis. A lot of schemes, a lot of dimensions are attached to it, which you already seen. And to be fair, the government has not been entirely silent on this. In 2023, two significant things happened. First, the Colonial Era Prisons Act of 1894 was finally replaced by the Model Prisons and Correctional Services Act 2023. Now, this new law formally shifts the stated purpose of prisons from punishment to reformation and rehabilitation. It introduces concepts like electronic tagging for prisoners which are on parole, better prisoner classification, and a framework for vocational training for prisoners. Again, steps towards rehabilitation. And on paper, it's a genuine step forward. And the second change was the Bharatiya Nyaya Suraksha Sanhita BNSS, which actually replaced the old CRPC, and it introduced a crucial provision under section 479 for the first time offenders who have served 1/3 of the maximum sentence for their alleged offense. The law now says they must be released on bond, and the jail superintendent is legally required to apply for the release when they hit that threshold. No more waiting passively. The state has to act. There are also the e-prisons project, which is digitizing prisons record and integrating them with a national criminal justice system, so that when an under trial becomes eligible for a bail or a release, there's an automated alert rather than a forgotten file in someone's drawer. And this would actually make the criminal justice system in our country better. And the Supreme Court, in the Satyendra Kumar Until case in 2022, took the extraordinary step of recommending that India enacts a dedicated bail act, which is standardized, clear, non-discretionary, to remove the wealth-based discrimination which is built into this current system of our country. But here's the honest assessment. The gap between legislation and implementation in this country is vast enough to swallow entire reform frameworks whole. The BNSS came into force in 2024, but courts and police are still adjusting to it. Undertrial's Review Committee, which are supposed to meet every quarter to identify eligible prisoners for release, still suffers from bureaucratic delays and poor coordination between judiciary, police, and prison administration. So the law exists, the implementation is lagging, and the most important thing India hasn't done just yet, it hasn't built enough open prisons. There are models that work. For example, Rajasthan's Sanganer Open Camp has been operating for decades. Prisoners live in a semi-open environment. They work, support their families, and transition back into the society. It costs the state less. It reduces recidivism, and it treats prisoners as human beings rather than waste to the warehoused. The Justice Amitava Roy Committee recommended in 2018 that this model be scaled up nationally, but it hasn't been at any meaningful scale. And what is at stake here is not abstract. It is the credibility of the Indian Constitution. The Supreme Court established in Hussain Ara Khatun versus State of Bihar in 1979 that the right to a speedy trial is a fundamental right under Article 21. 45 years later, people are spending 5 or more years in jail awaiting their trial. The gap between constitutional promise and constitutional reality has never been more visible in any country like here. So here is what the core insight is. What is the one thing worth taking from all of this? It's this. India is not running a criminal justice system. It is running a poverty penalty system. Yes, poverty penalty system. The people in India's jails are not predominantly the most dangerous criminals. They are predominantly the most economically vulnerable people, those who cannot afford bail, who cannot afford a lawyer, who cannot navigate a system that was never designed to protect them. 86.3% of prison's population is between 18 and 50 years old. These are not old, incapacitated people at the end of their lives. These are young and middle-aged adults, the exact people who should be building the country's economy, who should be raising children, contributing to communities. Instead, they are being warehoused in overcrowded cells at public expense, emerging more traumatized, more connected to the criminal networks, and less able to contribute to the society than when they went in. The system is not just failing to deliver justice, it is actively producing injustice and then spending taxpayers' money to sustain it. And there is a phrase in India's legal tradition: bail is the rule, jail is the exemption. The Supreme Court has said it repeatedly. Every law commission has said this. Every prison reform committee has said it. But the reality on the ground is the exact opposite. Jail is the default, bail is the the exception, available primarily to those who can afford to access it. When a country claims to be world's largest democracy and simultaneously runs a prison system where more than 9,000 people have waited over 5 years for their trial, they're constitutionally guaranteed something fundamentally has gone wrong. Not with the criminals, with the system that is supposed to hold them. See, Justice V.R. Krishna Iyer once said, and I want you to hold this, prisons are built with stones of law, but they must be managed with the touch of humanism. What we have instead is prisons built with a stone of law and managed with the touch of bureaucratic indifference. Now, one final thought I want to leave you with. We talk a lot in this country about the scale of our ambitions. We talk about becoming a developed nation by 2047. We talked about a demographic dividend, all these young people who will power our economy. We talk about the rule of law as the foundation of a strong state. But here's the question I can't shake. A country that lets 9,000 plus people sit in a prison for more than 5 years without conviction, in jails operating at double their capacity with half their medical staff missing, is that country building the rule of law? Or is it just building the infrastructure of the rule of law while letting the substance of it rot? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. A justice system is only as strong as what it does to people who have the least power within it. Not the high profile cases, not the ones covered on news channels, the ones nobody's covering. The ones in cell number 7 of some district jail in a small town whose families stopped coming to visit 3 years ago because they couldn't afford the bus fare. The National Crime Record Bureau has published the data. The Supreme Court has issued the directions. The Parliament has passed the laws. The committees have written their reports. Everything that needs to be said has been said. Across decades it has been said. The question isn't whether India knows how to fix this. The question is why in 75 years of independence have we chosen not to fix it? And more importantly, who is it actually convenient for to keep it exactly the way it is? Think about it. Let me know in the comment section. I hope you got a new perspective. All the very best and have a beautiful day. Thank you.